This video is an extract from our weekly podcast, which is available right now on our Patreon page at patreon.com/prettygoodgaming, or you can wait till next Wednesday when it goes live to everyone and watch it then. Cheers. Resident Evil 7 came out earlier this year. Generally speaking, we're fans in the office. Guys, I'm not sure if you're as hot on it as the rest of the guys here, but it's a good game. It's got 86 on Metacritic on current-gen consoles. Widely seen as a return to form for the series in many ways. It's a return to the horror roots, much more similar to the original Resident Evil, despite the shift from third person, or it's not even third person. What kind of camera would you call Resident Evil?
It's just like static camera,
exactly, yeah, it's like camera angles from cinematic camera angles. I don't know. So it's moved from that to first person. Despite that, it's generally seen as a very good game. Potential Game of the Year contender for horror fans especially. Conversely, Resident Evil 6 came out a few years ago. That is not a good game. That's got 60 on Metacritic on current gen, so they've brought it back to current gen consoles. That's got 60, and it's got 67 on the Xbox 360, which is the console it originally released on, or that generation. So Resident Evil 6 is shite, okay? Resident Evil 7 is good. Having said that, Resident Evil 7 sold below expectations for Capcom, so they've released their financial reports, Capcom, and it turns out they've sold 3.5 million copies of Resident Evil 7, which is good. That's a lot of millions. I mean, 3.5 million is nothing to be snuffed at. They wanted 4 million, right? And they've got a target of 10 million for it.
10 million lifetime.
Exactly, so within 10 years or whatever. It's disappointed them sales-wise, but despite the fact it was a critical success. Resident Evil 6 sold 5 million in the same window, so 6 months after its release, it sold 5 million copies. Resident Evil 6 is shite. I can't even express to you how rubbish of a game it is, okay? But also get this, Resident Evil 6 has sold 1.1 million units this gen as well, so they've brought it forward and remastered it, and even that has sold 1 million units. Why and how is one game as good as Resident Evil 7 not selling as well as Resident Evil 6, which is shit, right? Why is Resident Evil 6 so popular, Resident Evil 7 isn't?
It's the same reason everyone goes to see the Transformers movies, isn't it? They're low effort, turn your mind off, trash.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 6 is the exact same. It's mindless action.
Bombastic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like assault on the senses.
Yeah.
You can turn your brain off and just mindlessly play it for a while.
It shows to me that market research and focus groups and stuff like that, they've got a point. As much as we hate to see a game that comes out and it's very cynically made and it's obviously there to appeal to the masses or to the casual audience, that comes out and it just sells better than something like Resident Evil 7, which is fan service. It's pure like, this is what you wanted, right guys? Well, here it is. Well, you wanted to return to horror roots, you wanted some creativity, you wanted to move away from like crashing helicopters and
zombie
dinosaurs, tentacle monsters everywhere and stuff. It's something that Resident Evil 7 creatively is a much better product than Resident Evil 6. It just doesn't sell as well.
Right, there's a couple of reasons for this for me. So the first reason might be that Resident Evil 6 sold a lot more. People saw it was shite, decided not to buy number 7. Okay, people were soured by the sixth installment and decided, nah, I'm not doing it.
That's it, that's me. Yeah.
That's it. The other reason, like you touched on, maybe first-person horror isn't as popular a genre as third-person action. It's more appealing to the masses, is Resident Evil 6, because of the genre that it is. First-person horror isn't for everybody.
I think a lot of people are interested in Resident Evil 6 as well, just because it's a good value package.
Right.
You've got 4 full-length, all co-op campaigns. So if you buy it, you can play 30, 40 hours worth of co-op content. There's not many other games that offer that, so that's got to play a factor.
That is huge, That was actually going to be my big counterpoint to all this. Resident Evil 6 does something that, honestly, not very many games do these days. It's very hard to find couch co-op, right? To find local co-op. You can play Resident Evil 5 and 6, both of which are not seen as classics of the Resident Evil series, from start to finish, with someone else in the room. Both you can sit on the sofa and play a game together, start to finish. There's co-op puzzles. You've got to revive each other. There's tense situations that are made so much more fun because they're co-op, like boarding up houses and pushing stuff in front of doors so the zombies can't come through and things like that. All that stuff, right? Just not many games that do that now, and people want it. I think people want it. I want it personally, like just playing it in local co-op, and you just couldn't do that with Resident Evil 7, could you? There's no way to achieve that with Resident Evil 7.
It's a strictly single player experience, isn't it?
It would lose something, if anything, if you put someone else in there. You wouldn't feel as afraid and vulnerable.
You wouldn't have that isolation horror aspect to it as much.
Do you guys think this will affect future Capcom and Resident Evil products? Do you think Capcom will look at this and go, well, we tried fan service and it didn't work out for us. We're going to go back to just focus testing, getting 10-year-old kids in here, asking them what they want and doing whatever they say, because that's what's worked for us in the past. We need more money. This is all part of a financial picture that is kind of okay for Capcom. They would probably wanted everything to do a little bit better. All the numbers are a bit lower than they wanted, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it'll have a knock-on effect in the future. What do you guys think?
As much as I'd like to say it wouldn't, I know it will, because recently Ultra Street Fighter 2 on the Switch, everyone thought that was ridiculous. 20-year-old game at 35 quid. It sold 500,000 copies on the Switch.
This is what I'm talking about, see?
So Capcom announced they're getting ready to do a barrage of titles on the Switch, was their actual wording.
Yeah.
And just today they announced Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2 are being ported to the Switch.
Full price.
Probably, yeah.
They've got a boner for this stuff now. They're like, oh, look at all this money.
It. So I reckon they're going to see Resident Evil 7 go, oh, it did all right, not as well as we hoped. Let's just go back to the action shit again.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's indicative of the industry as it is today. It's more geared around how much money we can make. So if they don't make as much money as they want to make, then it's seen as a failure for them. But what I think that maybe they didn't do right for Resident Evil 7 is that, they panded to the community and they answered, what did the community want? But what they didn't do is they made sure they made a bloody awesome game. I like the game. I think it's all right. And you guys like it more than me. But there are certain things that are very frustrating about the game. I won't go into detail right now, but they didn't make the game as good as it could have been. It was quite frustrating. And I think there's some of that leads into how much sales they make, right? So if I'm recommending this game, word of mouth generate a lot of sales for companies. So if they are doing a fan service, then they need to make sure that the game is effing awesome. They really need to make sure that it's almost flawless. And I don't think they achieved that. I don't think they achieved a memorable enough game to make it recommended between friends.
It kind of woke me up to Resident Evil again. It didn't make me think, oh, that's a classic, but it did make me think, like, Resident Evil games can actually be good. Oh, that's right, I like Resident Evil. Because Resident Evil 5 and 6, I've completed and played through both of them in local co-op as well, so I've experienced them as fully as you can, I guess. They just made me roll my eyes. I feel like I was pushing through those games for a lot of it, and I don't like feeling like that at all, and it made me feel, you know what, I don't want Resident Evil anymore. But it's only because I was really paying attention to the marketing and stuff for Resident Evil 7. I was interested in where they were going. It looked scary. The setting, I loved it. I loved the way they sold it to me. I loved the way they advertised it, and it got me back into it. I think this woke me up to the series, and I hope they don't go back now to Resident Evil 6 and 5 and that kind of formula. Do you think Resident Evil 7 might live longer though as a game than Resident Evil 6 and 5? Because people like it, so do you reckon they could remaster it and stuff like that down the line?
Yeah, it's already a very well made game. It runs at like constant 60 FPS. It was one of the first full VR games. It'll definitely scale well in the future. It's going to age quite nicely, I reckon. And
it's the kind of experience where it feels pretty replayable, just because that experience of the very beginning of getting into the kind of house for the first time and going through the kitchen, and it was all memorable stuff for me. That those details at least are memorable details, and maybe 4 or 5 years time I'd want to go back in. And I don't know. I think that setting a target of 10 million sales might make it disappointing for them, because if they're expecting 10 million and it gets 9.5, then they're like, oh, well, let's not do that again. What a waste.
I think 10 million is overly ambitious for what was basically a reboot of the franchise.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got a lot of goodwill to make up again. So 10 million for a drastically different game, it's a bit outrageous.
I think their failure was, in a nutshell, is that fans like yourselves of the series were obviously going to buy it and enjoy it because it's exactly what you wanted. People like me who weren't following the series, who've not got a lot of exposure to Resident Evil games, they didn't win me over.
Yeah.
And I think that's where they failed. They needed to win people like me over, and they didn't do that.
Well, that's Resident Evil 7 then. It just hasn't done as well as Resident Evil 6. Let's see how it influences Resident Evil in the future. Thank you very much for watching this podcast extract. Remember to like the video if you did enjoy it, subscribe if you want to see a new gaming video from us every single day, and remember to check us out on Patreon if you want the full podcast right now. See you next time.